Hello there and welcome to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. We're here every week with a show on topical interest and interesting guests, and both of those in place this week. We're going to solve that age-old question of when you turn the light switch, why does the electricity turn the light on?
Yeah, we really struggled with what to do on this show, whether to do that or tackle an equally interesting topic such as do penguins have knees. But we decided to go with this rather shocking topic of why the light goes on or not when you flip the switch. It's an electricity show with two people who know a lot about electricity, and you never know that you need it so badly until you don't have it. And we're going to talk to people who control whether we have it or not.
Yeah. Why do we have it? Why does it cost what it costs? A lot of the issues that we'll be dealing with on electricity. I hope you'll enjoy our guests, and we'll get to it when we return on The Verdict.
For one Oklahoma-based company, success didn't happen overnight. Initially, the days were long, 80-hour weeks common. As we grew, we wanted to share our success, and the ideals of corporate and civic responsibility found a welcome home. Today, we're the largest investor in the Sooner State and a source for exciting, new, high-quality jobs. We're Chesapeake Energy, committed to building a better Oklahoma.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Kent's going to introduce our guest.
We are very pleased today to have with us two guests to visit with us about the subject of electricity and how it gets to our home. Across the table from me, making her second visit to The Verdict, is the Honorable Denise Bode with the Oklahoma Corporation Commission. Commissioner Bode is Vice Chairman of the Oklahoma Corporation Commission. She obtained her undergraduate degree at the University of Oklahoma, her law degree at George Mason University, and her LLM or Masters of Law degree in taxation from Georgetown University. She's been on the Corporation Commission since 1997. She's active in the regulation of electricity in Oklahoma, and we're sure glad you'd come back and visit with us again, Commissioner.
Thank you for inviting me.
Sitting to her left is Max Speegle. Max is the General Counsel of the Oklahoma Municipal Power Authority. We'll ask Max a little bit more about what that is in a minute. It is a state agency here in Oklahoma. He did his undergraduate work at Oklahoma State University and his law degree at the University of Oklahoma. He's been General Counsel to University of Central Oklahoma. He has been both city attorney and city manager to the city of Edmond. He is a Vietnam vet, and this is his first visit to the Verdict. And Max, it's sure good to have you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Commissioner, I think most of our viewers know that when they get their electric bill, they see the price and they know that that cost is in some way controlled or regulated by a government official somewhere down the line. How does all that work, and how is the consumer affected by your office, the Corporation Commission?
Well, the Corporation Commission regulates all investor-owned electric utilities in Oklahoma, and it also regulates to the extent that electric cooperatives have not opted out of our regulation. We oversee their rate of return and other aspects. Specifically, what the Commission does in its oversight is we set the rate of return that they can charge you for their electricity. We oversee the reliability of electricity and have rules in place that require that the companies keep their equipment up, that they keep vegetation managed, that that supply of electricity, which is so important to us in a digital age with all the computers and equipment we have plugged into those sockets, We work on that. We also work on security issues, and so we make sure that each electric utility has a security plan in place to protect against vandalism, terrorism, those kinds of things. And of course, those issues came up after 9/11, and so we had to enact new rules in that area as well.
Well, let me ask you, follow up on what you just said. Let's assume, heaven forbid, that we had a calamity like Katrina here in Oklahoma, and power lines were down, electricity was off, and the companies were not being responsive. I presume you'd have some authority to try to move them into action.
Absolutely. We have enforcement authority over utilities, and if they're out of compliance with our rules, our Consumer Services Division or Public Utility Division could bring the company before the commission and charge them with a violation of our rules. And the penalty for a violation is $500 a day per instance. So that adds up pretty quick if they're out of compliance. So yes, we do, and yes, we do monitor it through our Consumer Services and Public Utility Division very closely. We have field staff that are out monitoring those things.
Max, tell our viewers, what is the Oklahoma Municipal Power Authority? I know it's a state agency, but what is it, what's its mission, and how does it work?
Well, Oklahoma Municipal Power Authority is a state agency created by the legislature to, in effect, supply the electric needs of cities that have their own distribution systems. There are 63 cities in Oklahoma that operate their own distribution system. So OMPA was created to generate and transmit the electricity to those cities so that they can distribute it to their customers.
Now, just as an example, one such city, I guess, is Edmond.
Edmond, yes.
And Edmond would purchase or obtain its electricity to supply its citizens from OMPA?
That's correct. It's a long-term contract. So really, the cities are part of the OMPA organization, meaning that we supply the generation, transmission, the cities supply the distribution, sort of analogous to what Commissioner Bode was saying about an investor-owned utility, which really supplies all three, the generation, the transmission, and the distribution.
I'm not sure I specifically understand that, Max. How does it get from the generator to my house?
That's a good question. The generator is a machine that spins and creates electricity by spinning magnets, and those somehow, some fuel makes that happen. From the generating station, then they're transmitted along transmission lines cross country to a substation somewhere in a city or someplace where there's a load, and then it's stepped down from high voltage to lower voltage to distribute on the lines that people see in their alleys behind their house. And then those are distribution lines that go into their homes.
Well, is that pretty much the way it worked 40 years ago, 50 years ago, or have we advanced tremendously, or has it evolved through the years?
The basic technology is about the same as it's been for about 75 or 100 years. Of course, there's tremendous improvements and efficiencies that have been made, but the generation, transmission, distribution functions of the electric industry are basically the same as they've been for many years.
So they got it right the first time, is that what you're
They
telling
did get
me?
it right.
Thomas Edison knew what he was doing.
Thomas Edison knew, and he had lots of help. The transmission function has changed over time because used to be they were smaller generators located closer to the loads, and as the years went by, it was more efficient to have very large generating stations. So these were located in areas that were not populated, and that required the transmission system to be upgraded so they could move the power from the plants to the place where people consume it in their house.
Well, let me ask Commissioner Bode a question. We see many industries that used to be regulated becoming deregulated.
Right.
Airline industry, trucking industry, and on and on.
Right.
There has been some effort across the country with spotty success, I suppose, to deregulate the electricity industry.
Right.
Before we get to should it be deregulated, why is it regulated in the first place? Why isn't it just like the sale of automobiles or the sale of pencils? Why does the state regulate the sale of electricity?
Well, because it's a monopoly function, and if there were a sufficient...
A lawful monopoly function.
Well, monopoly, I don't mean monopoly in a pejorative way. It's a monopoly because there's really only one provider. Now, in other states, in Texas, right next door, they have set up a scheme where they have deregulated and separated the generation from the transmission and distribution. And so they are in the process of providing, electricity on a deregulated basis. Now, one of the big problems that they're discovering, and we have, I think, about half a dozen states, right, Max, across the country that have deregulated. The problem is, as higher prices occur, they're trying to figure out ways to come up with lower cost electric generation to keep the prices down, and unfortunately that means building new facilities, and in a deregulated market, who's going to pay for building new generation? And that's a major question right now. Oklahoma considered a couple of years ago, and the reason we didn't do it at that time was because we didn't have sufficient infrastructure, transmission lines, and basically an electron highway in place so that competitors could compete over those transmission lines. They were just too full, not enough of them. And so if we had deregulated at that point, we would have had a deregulated monopoly because there was only enough room for one provider. And so that would not have been good for consumers, as we found out a month or two after that legislation was considered in California when they had rolling blackouts and stuff as a result of their deregulation effort.
Let me jump in here and get us to a break. We're discussing electricity with Commissioner Denise Bode and Max Speegle. We'll be right back.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information. American Express Tax and Business Services. We're accountants. We do taxes, business valuations, estate planning, and consulting. And we're right here in Oklahoma, working with the owners of small and medium-sized businesses. Steve Wilsey and Stuart Meyer have the resources and the experience. American Express Tax and Business Services. In Oklahoma City, the phone number is 405-843-5311.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett and Kent Myers. We're here discussing electricity with Corporation Commissioner Denise Bode and Max Speegle. Kent?
Let me ask you, Commissioner, to expand a little bit more on why deregulation or when deregulation is appropriate. What has to happen before deregulation is appropriate?
Well, as I mentioned before the break, one of the big issues is having sufficient infrastructure in place so that a marketplace can work. Prior to that, the commissions or regulatory agency stands in the place of a competitive market to oversee the industry and make sure that people are being treated fairly. We act as the sheriff. But when the marketplace starts working, when competitors are available to work and to basically sell power over that transmission lines, when there's enough transmission lines, then the commission can stand back and just act as sort of the, a mediator over disputes.
And then in Oklahoma, the competition would be between OG&E, PSO,
independent power producers.
Independent power producers, co-ops.
Yes.
And when those people are in a position to compete against each other, then state regulation ceases to become as necessary.
Right. Then we really focus on consumer issues and making sure that consumers are fully informed, about choices and that can make those decisions. And we really focus on the billing issues, and our role really changes.
But we're not there yet in Oklahoma.
No.
Okay.
Well, let me jump in here. Max, it would appear that California's done some things wrong because they don't seem to be able to get to everyone 24 hours a day, 365 days a year when you hit that switch electricity does come out. Where did they go wrong?
Well, California a few years ago was unsatisfied with the prices that they were paying in this regulated market. The consumers were clamoring to their elected officials that something needed to be done about high prices. So they created a situation where it was deregulated, there was competition theoretically, but they were unwilling to have new power plants and new transmission lines be built in their areas. So
You mean from an environmental standpoint?
Well, yes, no, not in my backyard type situation. They wanted to import the power from somewhere else, and just didn't really, as Commissioner Bode said, didn't have the infrastructure to import that power, and they required their own regulated utilities to sell their power plants. So they basically starved themselves out of electricity, and the price went up because of some bad actors that were manipulating the market. So they sort of got it from both ends. When that happened, Oklahoma and other states decided we better take a close look at this before we dive into this pond. But in California, the problem was basically that they deregulated without really thinking it through and be willing to have the infrastructure in place to supply their own needs.
And they had the bad luck, too, of depending so much on hydropower, which was from water, and they had a drought that year. So, I mean, not only did they not, even their existing infrastructure didn't work because they had a drought, which is the whole idea that we're trying to avoid by having a diversification of generation, not just having it come from one source of fuel.
But you mentioned that there are communities that don't want a power plant built in their area. Are there environmental concerns about these plants?
Well, of course there are. They're very large facilities most of the time. They are environmentally sound. There's all kinds of Environmental Protection Agency requirements on power plants. They do burn fossil fuels, those type do. As Commissioner Bode said, there are different types of plants. There's hydroelectric. In Oklahoma, we have wind power, which non-polluting. Some people may say they don't want those in their backyard. They're very large structures. Cape Cod, for instance, they don't want a wind generator, they say, out in their seascape. But aside from some of those issues, if you diversify your fuel mix, you avoid the environmental issues that may be a problem in one particular area. But most people need to realize that you have to have those power plants someplace, and you have to have a power line someplace. And if you're unwilling to allow it to happen, you may have difficulty getting power supply to your city.
And we are so blessed in Oklahoma because, you know, we use about 13,000 megs a year of electricity, and you know, we have in terms of generation from a variety of sources as much as 18 to 20 capacity for electricity. So energy is us, and it's abundant and it's affordable, and we have a real diversified supply coming on. And if we can just build that infrastructure so that we have more transmission, we can really, you know, have a cutting edge on the rest of the country in terms of having energy, which is such a part of our future in the digital age. Having energy give us an advantage, Oklahoma.
That's got to be a economic development plus.
Oh, it is. It's fabulous. And you know, it's interesting, you know, Max mentions the wind power. We went from 0 to being top 10 in the country in wind generation. And in addition to clean, renewable fuel, which is really great, we also have it as a tourist attraction. People stop along the interstates to see those wind facilities, those wind turbines out there, because they're just fabulous looking, and it's been a very big plus. Most of the landowners, in fact, I think all of the landowners have been very excited about putting wind power in, and it gives us a diversified portfolio, just like burning natural gas, which is an Oklahoma fuel. We're number 2 in the country in natural gas production. So we're using an Oklahoma homegrown fuel, and coal, you know, clean coal from Wyoming, and we are burning Oklahoma coal in at least one of our major facilities. So we have a real diversified portfolio. So it's good news for the future, I think, for our state.
Well, insofar as what's going on today, for instance, in the natural gas market with the price of natural gas becoming very, very high, are any of our power plants here in danger of just not being able to, can they switch from natural gas to some other source to generate their electricity?
Well, they probably can't switch that particular plant, at least not easily, but most utilities try to have a fuel mix in their portfolio so that you've got some gas and some coal, some wind, and in OMPA's case, we have hydroelectric, so that you have this stack of power, and based on the economics, you run the plants that are most economic at that time. So coal really is usually, for Oklahoma utilities, is the most efficient. So they run all the time, middle of the night, when the load is down, there's usually only coal plants running. In the peak part of the day, hot afternoon in the summertime, gas plants are running also.
Go ahead.
Just 30 seconds left
Sure.
or so.
Yeah.
Future, 10 years from now, will we be getting electricity pretty much the same way we do now, or would you like to see some change?
I think our portfolio is going to be even more diversified in the future. We're going to have more efficient plants. One of the new ideas for plants is a new technology that, although it basically burns coal, it can also burn biomass. And in fact, we've got a couple of companies in Oklahoma looking at that kind of generation. But it is great news for Oklahoma because we're planning ahead. We're going to build the transmission. We've come up with a regional solution for building electric transmission that will cost consumers in Oklahoma less than if we didn't have that regional solution. And so I think we've got great news to attract business to Oklahoma.
Commissioner Bode, Max Speegle, thank you both for coming on The Verdict and discussing electricity.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thanks, it was a pleasure.
No brownouts.
No brownouts coming in Oklahoma.
Kent and I will have a
We're gonna
final
keep
word after this.
That land next door was a mess. Take more than a lawnmower to revive that land. I heard the oil and natural gas people was cleaning up old oil sites, and it wouldn't cost us a plug nickel. Oh yes, sir, it was quite a revival. The whole church showed up, want to make a playground for the kids. It sure is a blessing.
Bringing out the best in each student. That is the simple goal and tradition of Heritage Hall. The focus on the individual shapes the educational experience at Heritage Hall. Each student benefits from small classes, able, dedicated teachers, a solid academic curriculum, and exceptional co-curricular programs of athletics, arts, community service, and other activities, parental involvement, personalized counseling, and the development of responsibility, integrity, and love of learning. If you want education taught with pride, then you want Heritage Hall.
We've been discussing electricity on The Verdict. I was reminded today of a story of a retired baseball player of whom it was said he was so fast that he could hit the light switch and be under the covers before the room got dark. Now, we didn't answer that question of how but we answered about every other question dealing with electricity.
We did. We tried to be an information show. We were somewhat tongue-in-cheek about doing a show on whether penguins have knees. We may end up doing something pretty close like that. But we thought this show would be interesting to our viewers to know just about how electricity gets from where it starts to when we need it. And thanks to Honorable Denise Bode and Max Speegle for coming on and giving us this very good fundamental information about how the electricity market works, because it is a fascinating subject and it's one we don't think about unless we don't have it. Speaking of fascinating shows, next week we're going to be talking about something that we hope never happens, but that is, or happens again I should say, but that is terrorism in Oklahoma. We're going to have Jerome Holmes, former United States District Attorney, Assistant United States District Attorney in the Western District of Oklahoma, who's now in private practice, join us to talk about that, because that was one of his duties, to monitor and try to see what's going on about terrorism in Oklahoma. He has some fascinating things to tell us about his duties and what actually is going on in Oklahoma, and we're pleased that Jerome would join us.
We have some website information we want to give out. First of all, you can contact Denise Bode, the Oklahoma Corporation Commission. That web address is occ.state.ok.us. And you can reach the OMPA at simply ompa.com. And of course, The Verdict's website is very simple. It's theverdict.tv. We'll see you next week on The Verdict.